It's been over a year since a plane crash claimed the life of Polish President Lech Kaczynski.
How could it have happened that the plane crashed and didn't reach the airport?
Worse, the president's plane crashed on Russian soil.
This was a chief of state of a neighboring country on an extremely sensitive political mission.
Russian experts have conducted an investigation and reported their findings. The Polish pilots are at fault.
It seemed there was some kind of dirty trick here.
Conspiracy theory sprung up immediately.
Polish Interior Minister Jerzy Miller has examined the evidence and has come to a different conclusion.
Everyone understood the importance of this investigation.
The stakes go far beyond aviation safety. The pride of a nation and even its political future may hang in the balance.
It's not every day that they have to investigate a plane crash, and it's a matter of top political importance.
Jerzy Miller is just hours away from revealing the conclusions of Poland's independent investigation into the devastating crash at Smolensk airport. It all started 15 months earlier. Polish Air Force Flight 101 is carrying 89 passengers, including President Lech Kaczynski. 4 of Poland's best pilots are in the cockpit. They're elite military airmen from the country's Special Aviation Regiment.
Have you decided yet?
Throttle down. Throttle down.
Just after 10 o'clock, the plane begins its descent to Smolensk. The state flight from Warsaw took off at 9:27 this morning. The passengers are a cross-section of the Polish elite, dignitaries on their way to mark a grim and controversial anniversary.
This anniversary was on April the 10th. It was a great Polish tragedy, the murder of Polish soldiers in World War II by Stalin.
In 1940, Stalinist forces marched 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals into Russia's Katyn forest to be executed.
The Soviet government took the decision, the document still exists, to murder them all.
For decades after World War II, the Soviet Union held Poland firmly in its grip. Until the fall of communism, the Soviets denied all responsibility for the Katyn massacre.
The history of Polish-Russian relations has been very difficult, especially when it comes to the Soviet period. Because no one wanted to have blood on their hands for shooting the Polish officers.
For the first time, the Russian government was acknowledging the crime committed and the pain that the Poles still feel for that crime.
No one better understands Poland's troubled past than President Kaczynski. He's a highly respected statesman with political roots in the anti-communist solidarity movement of the 1980s.
Kaczynski cared extremely deeply about Polish national tradition, wanted to be there to commemorate the dead on the anniversary of the massacre.
By visiting a memorial near the site of the massacre, the Polish president is taking an important step towards reconciliation.
Of course, there was a lot of media attention for this event. We started preparing and making arrangements around 2 weeks ahead of time.
The man who has organized this momentous occasion is Director of Protocol Mariusz Kazana.
Water for you, sir.
President Kaczynski and his wife,
Ma'am?
are joined by many of Poland's top brass, including Lieutenant General Andrzej Błaszczyk, commander of the Polish Air Force. There are also descendants of the victims of the massacre traveling to today's ceremony.
To the extent that I can attempt to imagine their mood, it would have been solemn and powerful and sad.
The elite crew is flying a Tupolev Tu-154M, an extremely popular Russian-built plane. As they get closer to the airport, the workload picks up. Flight engineer Andrzej Michalak must calculate engine performance.
Please have the temperature and pressure.
I'll tell you what the temperature is. Cold.
He needs some vital information from the tower.
Are we going to speak Russian?
Yes.
English is the international language of civil aviation. But since Smolensk is a military airport, controllers here speak only Russian. Passenger jets don't normally land at this base. But for the Polish delegation, it's the closest runway to the Katyn Memorial.
This was a military airfield, and the incoming flight was, as a matter of fact, civilian. It doesn't matter that the crew is made up of members of a special division of the Polish military. The plane was flying according to the rules of civilian aviation.
Captain Arkadiusz Protasiuk is the only member of this crew that speaks Russian. He'll have to handle the communication with the tower.
Polski 101, Polish 101. Good morning.
Polish 101, acknowledge. Polish Air Force, we have fog. Visibility is 400 meters.
Understood. Polish Air Force 101. Heavy fog, visibility is only 400 meters.
The fog was so dense nothing was visible. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face, or the person standing next to you.
Smolensk Air Base doesn't have the equipment needed for a radio-guided landing.
It is not the best technologically equipped airfield in our country.
The pilots will first have to descend to 100 meters, then look for the runway. Once they spot it, they will have to land manually.
Temperature and pressure, please.
Temperature is +2, pressure 745. We do not have landing conditions.
Continuing our approach, if we're unable to land, we'll go around on autopilot.
Captain Protasiuk takes his plane lower to get a first-hand look at landing conditions.
From their flying experience, the crew knew that fog can be uneven. 1 minute, it can be very dense, but 10 or 15 minutes later, the wind can clear it.
But as they get closer, the fog gets even thicker.
Approaching outer marker. On course and on glide slope.
Then the situation takes a turn for the worse. As the crew strains to catch sight of the runway, the sound of an alarm suddenly fills the cockpit.
100 meters.
We are leaving for a go-around.
In the cabin, passengers are preparing for an imminent landing.
90 meters.
But the crew is struggling to make the plane climb.
40.
Depart for the go-around. How long has it been?
One of the darkest days in Polish history. A day that was to have been commemorated by the president himself will now be remembered for yet another tragedy. At the Katyn Memorial, hundreds of people await the arrival of the Polish delegation. But what they get instead is devastating news. The president's plane has crashed.
Никто представить себе не мог, что может произойти.
No one could imagine that something like this tragedy, this crash, could happen.
Первые слухи о том, что
When we heard the first rumors that the Polish plane had crashed, we thought it was a foolish joke.
что это чья-то дурацкая шутка. Потом еще через несколько минут, 10, может быть, минут,
But then, after about 10 minutes, we saw how the Polish people were hugging and crying.
поляки, мужчины и женщины там обнимаются, они рыдают. очевидец, который снял.
There was a witness who used a cell phone to record the very first seconds of the tragedy, when you could still see the fire, when the fuel was still burning.
Значит, топливо горело.
Minutes after the crash, military personnel and rescuers converge on a forest 420 meters short of the runway. They discover a scene of total destruction. The charred remnants of the president's plane litter the ground.
Когда я приехал к месту падения, первое мое
When I got to the crash site, my first impression was, when did they remove all the bodies? But after I got a closer look, the picture was very sad. There were body fragments, 96 people, and not a single full body. I couldn't even imagine this was possible.
человек и ни одного целого тела.
No one has survived. It's a monumental tragedy.
Единственная уцелевшая вещь,
The only thing I could see that had survived was the wreath they were bringing to the Katyn Memorial.
которую они везли на Катынский мемориал.
With questions already swirling about how such a disaster could happen, Russian air accident investigators arrive at the crash site.
We'll need to get an outpost. See what we have to work with.
They are members of the Interstate Aviation Committee known as the MAK.
Let's start over there.
Their task will be to figure out what happened and why.
We need to map every quadrant.
It's not every day that they have to investigate a plane crash, and it's a matter of top political importance.
News of the Polish president's death on Russian soil stuns all of Poland.
I thought about the people on board the plane. Because you see, I knew most of the passengers personally.
As the nation grieves, shock and sadness soon become mixed with suspicion.
My first thought was it an attack? Because of the deeply hostile relations in between Poland and Russia, conspiracy theories sprung up immediately.
Many Poles are convinced the world has just witnessed an assassination, a targeted killing orchestrated by President Kaczynski's political adversaries.
These were accusations that not only the crash was an intentional attack by the Russians, but that the Polish government knew it and was actually in cahoots with the Russians in order to eliminate a dangerous political opponent.
With so many high-ranking officials now dead, some fear Poland's entire government may collapse.
I was terribly concerned that we might not make it, that these were the 100 out of the 400 most important people in Poland. I wasn't sure if we've produced a state that can weather this shock.
At the crash site, the evidence is pointing in a direction that will not sit well with Poles.
Why would we even try to land in this fog?
Some claim the Polish pilots should not have tried to land in the heavy fog. The suggestion raises anger in Poland.
For the partisans of the conspiracy theory, it was just another Russian whitewash.
Poland's leaders are desperate to uncover the truth about the crash. They send their own investigators to work alongside the Russians.
To było duże wyzwanie.
It was a big challenge. Altogether, there were 34 people fully engaged in conducting research on this crash.
W którym pracowałem.
What have you got so far?
Podeszliśmy do badania. We approached the investigation with sound procedures.
W związku z czym na wstępie przyjęliśmy, że
Meaning that in the beginning, we assumed that every potential cause was possible.
stopniowo
And then we gradually eliminated what didn't fit.
to, co okazywało się, że nie wystąpiło.
They launch a painstaking search for any evidence that the flight may have been brought down by assassins.
Sprawdziliśmy również, czy nie ma
We also checked to see if there was any trace of explosives on the airplane wreckage.
na szczątkach samolotu.
Careful analysis by both Russian and Polish experts reveals no explosive residue on the wreckage. No sign that the plane was shot down. Investigators on both sides agree. The crash is a tragic accident, not a political assassination.
Natomiast bardzo szybko taką przyczynę,
That possibility was ruled out very quickly because of the complete lack of evidence.
ten czynnik brać pod uwagę.
Investigators must find the plane's black boxes.
Excuse me? Any sign of the flight recorders?
Not yet. But it's our top priority.
You know, of course, we need all three. Of course.
With suspicion growing at home, Polish investigators anxiously want to get their hands on all of the plane's recorders. The Tupolev had 3. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are Russian-made.
Have you decided yet?
They will reveal what the pilot said and how the airplane performed. A third Polish-made device called the Quick Access Recorder also captures flight data, but it can only be read by the device's Polish manufacturer. If the Russian and Polish data match, investigators will be assured that no one has tampered with either machine.
Było to istotne, ponieważ
It was essential because we expected to hear suspicions or accusations from the public that the data read by the MAK experts had been tampered with.
specjalistów z MAK mogły być zmanipulowane.
While the search for the recorders continues, investigators seek answers from the air traffic controller on duty that morning. They want to know why the pilots tried to land in such heavy fog.
They were not coming in to land. They were only doing a trial approach.
They learned that the crew was warned about the poor visibility,
We do not have landing conditions.
but they wanted to judge conditions for themselves.
From 100 meters, be prepared to do a go-around.
The plan was to descend to 100 meters and then fly over the airport.
At 100 meters, that was a decision height.
Lądowanie poniżej minimów zawsze niesie ze sobą
Approaching below the minimum always brings the risk of hitting objects on the ground. After that, there's no certainty that attempting a go-around can be done safely.
procedura odejścia na drugi krąg zakończy się bezpiecznie.
But investigators are puzzled. Something doesn't add up. At an altitude of 100 meters, the plane should have easily cleared the trees. Surveying the forest, they work to identify the first tree the Tupolev slammed into. They find it slightly more than a kilometer from the runway.
Pilots hit the tree at 11 meters.
If they intended to fly at 100 meters, how did they hit the tree?
We need more information.
For some reason, the presidential jet was flying dangerously low as it sped towards the airport. Was it a failure of the Russian plane or a mistake by the Polish crew? Investigators move one step closer to finding some answers with a major breakthrough: the recovery of the 2 Russian-made black boxes. The Polish flight recorder, though, remains buried in the wreckage.
Any sign of the QAR?
Not yet.
The flight data recorder may hold valuable clues about what doomed the president's plane. The device is rushed to the MAK laboratory in Moscow. Investigators download the data, searching for any sign of an onboard mechanical failure. But the analysis comes up empty.
Looks like everything was functioning.
Until the moment the plane struck the first tree, there was no malfunction whatsoever.
We'll send you a copy of the data.
It's beginning to look like the initial speculation is true. The Polish pilots may be at fault. Polish investigators need to be sure the Russian data has not been tampered with. Their only hope is to find the missing Polish-made flight recorder. But so far the search is proving fruitless.
Dopiero nałożenie tych
Only by combining all the parameters could we answer the questions. Did the crew follow procedures? Was the plane working properly to the end?
Czy samolot do końca był sprawny?
Meanwhile, investigators from both countries turn their attention to the cockpit voice recorder.
Jest to bardzo ważny element, który zawsze pomaga osobom, które...
This is a very important element that helps accident investigators understand the crew's last moments in the plane.
na aktywności załogi w samolocie.
Ready? Let's go ahead.
They immediately notice something unusual.
That sounds like the captain.
The captain is the one making radio calls to air traffic control, and he's doing it in Russian.
Why is the captain making radio calls?
Proper aviation procedures call for the navigator to handle the radio, while the captain concentrates on flying the plane. Investigators suspect the captain decided to handle the radio himself because he was the only one who could speak Russian.
Dowódcy, który, tak jak wcześniej rozmawialiśmy,
The captain who was flying the plane was in charge of the crew and handling the radio communication. His workload was too heavy.
To obciążenie było zbyt duże.
Moments later, the recording reveals something even more surprising.
Mr. Director, fog has rolled in, and the conditions we have right now will not be able to land.
Who is he talking to?
Mr. Director, the fog has rolled in. In the conditions we have right now, we will not be able to land. We'll make an attempt, but it probably won't work.
Then, we have a problem.
Sounds like Kazana, the Director of Protocol.
What he's doing in the cockpit?
The pilots were not alone in the cockpit.
Tutaj słyszeliśmy głosy.
We could hear voices of people who were definitely not crew members, and this meant that the cockpit was accessible to people who were not part of the flight crew. From 100 meters, be prepared to do a go-around.
Acknowledged.
Safety rules forbid visitors in the cockpit at key points in the flight.
Było to dla nas
It was surprising because it confirmed that the cockpit wasn't sterile. There's a rule that below a certain altitude, pilots should be isolated from the rest of the plane so they can concentrate on their tasks.
samolotu, aby mogli się skoncentrować na swoim zadaniu.
It now appears the presence of so many top officials on board affected the decision to land.
Sir, I have some news from the cockpit.
Pisaliśmy to jako
We describe it as indirect pressure, the pressure resulting from the weight of the task and the mission the aircrew was completing.
którą załoga wykonywała.
Some investigators believe General Błasik also visited the cockpit. As the mystery behind the crash of Air Force 101 grows deeper, one thing is clear.
In a crash, be it an air crash or a political crash or a crash in human relations, very seldom there's just one factor.
There is much more to this tragedy than simple pilot error. While Poland mourns the loss of its president, suspicion and doubt still linger over the cause of his death. Conspiracy theories are spreading.
The Polish media distrusted the information provided by the Russian experts. It seemed there was some kind of dirty trick here.
But at the crash site, investigators have uncovered the one thing that could erase many of those suspicions: the Polish-made flight recorder. Finally, Polish experts can study the data from both flight recorders side by side. They look for any discrepancy, any hint that the black box data has been altered. After a careful analysis, they reach a definitive conclusion.
All the data's here.
The two sets of data are a perfect match.
Było to dla nas bardzo ważne, ponieważ
It was important for us because it removed all doubt that the data might have been manipulated.
możliwości zmanipulowania zapisu.
With the data verified, investigators refocus their attention on the cockpit voice recorder.
Turn on your landing lights.
Lights on.
They hear a warning that the plane is dangerously low. But strangely, the pilots don't seem to react to it.
You can't see a thing. Why are they concerned about their altitude?
They should be.
Działanie pilotów
The reactions of the pilots and the crew should be immediate, without any hesitation.
dla nas podczas gdy wysłuchaliśmy pierwszy raz,
When we listened to the recordings for the first time and heard the very clear system warnings, it was very surprising that the crew didn't react properly.
że załoga nie zareagowała w sposób właściwy.
Turn on your landing lights.
Investigators are puzzled by the crew's behavior. They compare the plane's intended flight path to the altitudes called out by the navigator.
100 meters. 90 meters.
40. 30. 20.
Stop.
40.
Just after the navigator calls out 20 meters,
20.
the unmistakable sound of the plane hitting the first tree.
20 meters?
They hit the tree at 11 meters, not 20.
Something's not right. The navigator is calling out 20 meters, but the plane is only 11 meters from the ground.
They didn't know the altitude.
The recording leaves investigators with two important questions. Why did the crew ignore the alarms? And why were they closer to the ground than they thought? They pore over the flight data, checking for signs of an altimeter malfunction.
Lieutenant.
It could explain the crash.
What happens here?
But instead of a malfunction, they find that the altimeter reading makes a sudden jump. A barometric altimeter shows the plane's height above sea level by measuring atmospheric pressure. Air pressure goes up as the plane goes down. When approaching an airport, pilots usually calibrate the altimeter to account for the airport's height above sea level. But that's not what this crew did.
Someone reset the altimeter.
Jeden z członków załogi przestawił wysokościomierz.
One of the crew members switched the captain's altimeter to a pressure which changed the altitude reference.
Odebrał informację, że samolot
The plane seemed a little bit higher than it was in reality.
wyżej niż był faktycznie.
The numbers show that the instrument was reset to its default setting, a move that resulted in an altimeter reading much higher than the plane's actual height above the ground.
Why would a pilot do that?
Polish investigators take their questions to pilots from the same special regiment that flew the president.
What do you think they were doing?
They learn that military pilots sometimes use the barometric altimeter to solve an annoying problem. The altimeter is connected to the Terrain Altitude Warning System, or TAWS. It alerts pilots if they're getting too close to the ground. The system is pre-programmed with the location of most major airports and will not sound an alarm when the pilots are coming in to land. But that only works if the airport is in the database. Many, including Smolensk, are not.
W przypadku Smoleńska
The Smolensk airport, which is a military airport, was not included in the TAWS system.
było.
The alarm goes off so frequently at military airports that some pilots have developed a dangerous habit of disregarding the sound.
You can't see a thing.
Przeanalizowaliśmy wiele lotów
We analyzed many flights, and it turns out that they were in the habit of ignoring these alarms.
załogi do ignorowania tego typu komunikatów.
And that's not all.
You telling me you actually changed the altimeter to the wrong setting?
They've also come up with ways to silence the nuisance alarms. One way is to simply reset the altimeter. That fools the system into thinking the plane is flying at a higher altitude.
Turn on your landing lights.
Lights on.
It's a temporary fix. As the crew of the presidential jet continues to descend, the alarm sounds again just 20 seconds later.
Start playback.
It seems incredible that such an elite crew flying such high-ranking passengers would commit a breach of procedures.
100 meters.
Even if they did, it doesn't explain why the navigator was calling out the wrong altitude during the descent.
90 meters.
Stop playback. He was using his radio altimeter.
Most large jets are equipped with two types of altimeter.
40.
Since the barometric altimeter has been reset,
30.
the navigator could only have been using the second one, his radio altimeter. It uses radio waves to measure the distance between the plane and the ground below. But the terrain near Smolensk Air Base is uneven. Planes have to fly over a valley to reach it.
Look what happens here.
When the radio altimeter reads 100 meters, the Air Force jet was not 100 meters above the airport. It was 100 meters from the bottom of the valley. In the dense fog, the pilots couldn't see the ground. Once they cleared the valley, they were just a few meters from the treetops. The radio altimeter was giving them misleading information.
Natomiast używanie radiowysokości
Using the radio altimeter at this early stage of approach is a serious mistake.
ewidentnym błędem.
It doomed everyone on board. Investigators have discovered why the plane crashed into the forest. But there is another question to consider.
Why would he even try an approach in such foggy weather? Temperature +2, pressure 745. We do not have landing conditions.
The pilots were warned that conditions were not suitable for landing, yet they persisted and descended towards Smolensk Airport.
Należało po uzyskaniu informacji
After getting the information about the fog and visibility, the decision to fly to the alternate airport should have been made immediately.
na lotnisko zapasowe.
A closer look at Captain Protasiuk's history may help explain that decision. This was not the first time he'd flown with the President of Poland.
Everyone in Poland knew what happened a few years ago when the captain served as the co-pilot during the Azerbaijan flight. In August of 2008, the president wanted to fly into a war zone. Protasiuk was the first officer on the flight.
I'll inform ATC of your decision. Negative, we will not be landing in Tbilisi.
The captain refused to fly to an unsafe airport.
His captain was ordered to land in Georgia, but he did not follow this order.
The captain of that flight paid a high price for being cautious.
This seriously affected the pilot's career.
He was never chosen to fly for the president again.
There was no direct pressure from the president. But we all know, and certainly the pilots remembered, what happened when a pilot refused to land in Tbilisi.
He probably didn't want to lose his job.
Mr. Director, the Fokkers rolled in. We'll make an attempt, but it probably won't work.
No one wants to disappoint a president. Though Protasiuk knew landing was risky, he may have wanted to show his passengers that he was willing to try.
To be clear, this person did not give any instructions. But just his presence in the cockpit interrupted the workflow, the decision-making and communication among the crew.
Polish Air Force 101. We have fog. Visibility is 400 meters.
Understood. Polish Air Force 101.
Having to communicate with the tower in Russian only made things more stressful.
400 meters. Понял. Польский воздушный цели 101.
All the pressure may have led the captain to make a fatal mistake.
Continuing our approach. If we're unsuccessful, we'll go around on autopilot.
He plans to engage the autopilot's go-around function to climb away from the airport if he doesn't like what he sees. Pushing the go-around button should quickly increase power to the engines, enabling the plane to climb. But that can't work at this airport.
The key error was the assumption that it would be possible to climb in autopilot mode.
For the go-around function to work, the autopilot must be locked onto a specific beacon at the end of the runway. It's called an ILS beacon. But Smolensk Air Base doesn't have one.
100 meters. We're leaving for a go-around.
Protasiuk waited 5 seconds for the plane to climb out on its own before realizing he'd made an error.
90 meters.
By the time he realizes his mistake, it is too late. There's no dispute. The crew mishandled the approach. But Polish investigators don't think they are the only ones at fault.
Approaching outer marker. On course and on glide slope.
The air traffic controllers were responsible for guiding the plane to a safe landing. They knew visibility was extremely poor. So why did they go along with Protasiuk's plan to make a trial descent?
Polish 101 acknowledge. Polish Air Force, we have fog. Visibility is 400 meters.
Polish investigators need to know more about how Russian air traffic control may have contributed to the tragedy.
There's no doubt that the air traffic controller has a vital role, especially when the clouds and fog are so bad that you can't see the ground.
Atmosphere pressure, please.
Temperature is +2, pressure 745. We do not have landing conditions.
The investigators are surprised to discover that even though the airbase knew it would be handling a very important flight that day,
Are you at 500 meters?
the controllers seem unprepared to receive it. Interviews with the Russian air traffic controllers reveal that they had difficulty tracking the plane on its descent.
We asked him to report his altitude.
The Smolensk airport is a very poorly equipped airport.
Polish Air Force, are you at 500 meters?
We're at 500 meters.
The controllers had to rely on the captain to report his altitude. Polish investigators speculate that the equipment in Smolensk wasn't providing a clear image of the plane's location. The controller could not be sure if the plane was on course.
On course and on glide slope.
Obsługa lotniska potwierdza
The controller confirmed that the plane was on the flight path.
ścieżce. W momencie, kiedy
The moment it went below the flight path, the risk of disaster rose dramatically.
katastrofy wzrosło gwałtownie.
The controller confirmed the plane was on the correct approach path, when in fact it was dangerously low.
Nie mamy żadnych wątpliwości.
There's no doubt that the airport was not ready. The thickening fog only increased the level of tension and confusion in the control tower.
I just don't think we should bring him in. It makes no sense right now.
Before the president's plane reached the airport, the controllers knew it would be almost impossible to land. But they didn't have the authority to turn the jet away.
We have to find an alternate for the pole. We just don't have the weather.
They didn't want the plane to land.
Próbowali uzyskać wsparcie.
They tried to convince their superiors that this airplane should be redirected to another airport before they even started the landing procedure.
Oni będą go wprowadzać do podejścia do lądowania.
The decision whether or not the president of Poland should fly to Russia and where he should land is not made in Smolensk. It is not made by the head of flight operations or by the air traffic controllers. But the fact is that the conditions did not permit any kind of plane to land, especially a plane full of VIPs.
The controller was waiting for Captain Protasiuk to make the decision not to land.
We do not have landing conditions.
Continuing our approach. If we're unsuccessful, we'll go around and autopilot.
It's his call. Let them continue on their own.
Myślę, że taka sama presja pośrednia.
I think that the same indirect pressure that was experienced by the captain of the Tu-154 aircraft was shared by the ATC controllers because of the nature of this flight.
Rejsu również w sadzie wieży.
It all happened because of outside forces. The crew and the group of flight operators. They became hostages of the situation.
Although both reports criticize the actions of the pilots, the Polish report goes further, criticizing the Smolensk airport for its poor performance.
Approaching outer marker. On course and on glide slope.
I stąd potwierdzanie przez stronę rosyjską załodze.
The fact they confirmed that the flight path was correct when it wasn't may have been because their equipment was faulty.
Była wynikiem niesprawności technicznej tejże aparatury.
The Russians were much more evasive than the Poles. Poles frankly took on their responsibility the way the Russians did not take up theirs.
In the wake of the disaster, the special regiment assigned to transport Polish officials is disbanded. A little more than a year after the accident, Poland's Interior Minister Jerzy Miller presents his findings to the world. The Russians dispute his report's conclusions about Smolensk air traffic control. Despite 2 reports to the contrary, deep suspicions persist, including the belief that the president was assassinated.
You have people who are desperately trying to understand what happened, and they're given information they're not qualified to assess. I mean, I'm not qualified to assess information of the Russian or of the Polish Commission or of the counter experts. I'm not an expert. So finally, I have to decide whose experts do I trust.
In the end, 2 historic adversaries managed to put aside their differences and work together for a common goal.
Cel jest prosty.
The goal is simple.
W wypadku
Every accident must teach us a lesson.
dla wszystkich, jak szkolić załogę.
How to train the crew to make safety their highest priority when making decisions.
Jako najwyższą wartość.
Unfortunately, learning that lesson has come at a very high cost.
Bardzo dużo nas ta nauka kosztowała.